All right, so let's get started. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone is having a great event. My name is Nuno Maduro, and I am the author of the PHP testing framework, PEST. And in addition, I'm also a Laravel core team member, but today I'm here to talk about next level type checking in Laravel. And honestly, I've been super excited about type checking in general. I've been seeking ways to improve the framework on that regard. So today I'm going to give you my opinionated view about types on Laravel. But before we jump into that, let's start by explaining what is exactly type checking. And I come up with this very simple example in PHP, which is just this sum between a string and an integer. Now, something that always happens when PHP is about to execute an instruction is the type checker. In this case, we are trying to sum an integer, a string to an integer. And because this operation doesn't make any sense, PHP will tell us this is a type error. This is an unsupported operating types string plus integer. And therefore, the code doesn't get executed and you get the type error on the browser. Now, how good is this PHP type system? And let's take a look at an example. Here I have a very simple Laravel application. And the only goal of this Laravel application is display a static list of categories. Now, to display the static list of categories, obviously I have this index method. And this index method is collecting all the categories, mapping through each one of them to uppercase them, append this small symbol here, and return them all. Now, pretty simple code, but to see if this code makes sense, we have no choice than go to the browser and hit this specific endpoint. Now, when I hit the categories endpoint, what I'm getting is that this call to undefined function with the name with collect with double T. Now, this function doesn't even exist, so I'm going to add over into my Sublime text once again. I'm going to remove the extra T that doesn't make any sense, save my file, and then go again to the browser, possibly fill out some forms to hit this edge case and try to see what's happening again. And now I'm having this undefined property with the name titles. Of course, if I go back to my code, I can see that the property titles don't even exist on my controller. And this is a mistake because I actually want to collect the list of static categories. With this 1-minute demo, you can quickly understand how PHP's type system works. PHP's type system works at runtime, meaning that if you want to see if a particular piece of code works or makes sense, you actually need to execute that. If you perform a change deep down in your application, you need to actually hit all the endpoints affected by that change to see if it works. Now, we often forget that the goal of a type system is not actually catching errors in production. The goal of a type system is saving you time catching errors before you run the code. And actually, if we take a look at Rust and TypeScript, for example, which are, by the way, voted as the first and the second most loved programming languages in Stack Overflow, they don't have the same type system as PHP. In fact, I have prepared a small example to compare this PHP code to TypeScript code. And what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just mimicate this code, but this time opening this index.ts file that contains the same code, but in TypeScript. And yes, JavaScript, you can have classes and properties, etc. Now, the difference, though, with TypeScript is that if I want to see if this particular code makes sense and if it's working, I don't need to go to the browser. I can simply run TypeScript from the console, and TypeScript will basically point me to the right direction. As you can see here, TypeScript is displaying this message saying that the property titles don't exist on the type categories controller. And I can just address my issue without even going to the browser. Same happens with Rust. They also have this similar tool on the console, which you can just run and check all the bugs you have in your code on the console. Now, how can we make PHP's type system a little bit better? Well, it's super simple. We port some of those things we see in Rust in TypeScript and you move them to PHP. In other words, we start using static type checking instead of relying only on runtime type checking. And that is actually super easy with PHP. You can use this tool with the name PHP Stan, which is basically a PHP static analysis tool that understands PHP. And PHP Stan works in the very similar way, just like TypeScript, meaning that reports errors on the console. Yet, this tool is very good with vanilla PHP. To make this tool understand Laravel, you actually need to use Larastan, which is an extension if an extension on top of PHP Stan. Now, to get started, it's super easy. Just head over to the console and you type composer require Nuno Maduro /Larastan. Once you include the package via composer, you now also, just like TypeScript, have access to this CLI tool with the name PHP Stan. And similar to TypeScript, I also get a list of errors on my application without even running the code on the browser. So the first error seems to be, or the first list of errors, let's say, it seems to be related to this categories controller. So I'm going to add over there. And on the line 22, which I'm going to scroll down to see, I'm trying to access to this undefined property with the name titles. And titles don't even exist as we have seen before, so I'm going to replace this by categories. I'm going to clear my terminal and I'm going to run PHP Stan once again. And we can quickly see that we have jumped from 3 errors to just 2. And the second error it says we have is that on the line 26, we are trying to sum 2 strings. Now, remember that I wanted to actually append those 2 strings, and that can be done with PHP with a simple dot. Let's clear our terminal once again and run PHP Stan. And it's now saying to me that on the line 37, we have some unreachable statement. Well, this is the cool thing about static analysis in tools like PHP Stan, is that even though I'm working on this specific code, PHP Stan was able to detect that we have another code in a different part of my application that also have issues. And here on the line 37, you can see that indeed we have some unreachable code, and that's happening because of this DD. The DD is a divar dump of PHP, which is basically stopping the process, and this code doesn't even get executed. So let's remove the divar dump, which is probably a leftover from a developer, and run PHP Stan once again. And PHP is now saying that, hey man, the expression this categories in a separate line does nothing. So you better return it or just delete that code. So I'm going to return because indeed on this default method, I wanted to return the default category. Now, if I run PHP Stan, I don't expect to see any more errors on my application, meaning that I now can go to the browser and see what's happening. And I can see that I am indeed on the endpoints, on the category endpoint, displaying a list of categories appended with this symbol. How nice is that? And once you take a look at this example, you can understand that static analysis is not about types. You need to start seeing static analysis as a productivity tool. And there is often this misconception that people think that static analysis like PHP Stan is just about adding types all over the place. In fact, if we take a look at this categories controller, I don't have a single type on my application. And yet, PHP Stan was able to detect so many problems in my code. Now, one thing I would like to talk to you about is that if you think that this tool can give you productivity, if you find this presentation awesome, be mindful when you are trying to install PHP Stan in your project, because often a mistake I see people doing is that they install PHP Stan, they increase the level of strictness to max, and they see hundreds of thousands of errors. So you need to keep in mind that if you install PHP Stan in your project, you need to increase the strictness gradually. Meaning that if I go again into my code here, once I install PHP Stan, I don't want to start with a level 5, 6, 7, or 8. In PHP Stan have this level, which is the level of strictness that goes from 8 to 0. So once I install PHP Stan, I want to install PHP Stan with a level that my code base, my existing code base, is comfortable with. In this case, my code base is comfortable with level 5, as you were able to see. So I'm going to leave PHP stand at level 5 for a while now. I want that my team feel comfortable with this tool. I don't want to jump immediately to level 8 and find hundreds of errors in my code. I want to start with a level that my project is comfortable with, my team is comfortable with. All my colleagues that didn't know this tool can start to get familiar with PHP stand and understand the productivity that can bring with it. And then later, once I find the energy and time and everyone agrees with it, we can start increasing the levels. And here I'm going to put to level 6. And I'm going to clear the terminal and run PHP stand once again. Now, PHP stand is complaining to get started with this supported untyped collection. And for now, this is a module that I don't actually want to deal with. I don't want to deal with this module. So something that I'm going to do is that I'm going to use this configuration option with the name exclude paths. And I'm going to pass this file name. And PHP stand have a lot of these options, which you can exclude specific paths or files, add specific paths or files, or even ignore a specific error pattern if you want to. So let's clear the terminal and run PHP stand once again. Now we were able to jump from 10 errors to just 5, and all of them seem to be related with the categories controller. So let's go over there. Now, most of these errors are related to types. And indeed, PHP stand is telling me that if you want to jump to level 6, you need to give me some information regarding types. In other words, if you want me to protect you against more bugs, you need to start to give me some information about the intent of your code. So let's do that. Let's add some typings in our code. I'm going to tell PHP stand that this is an array of categories. I'm going to go to my public function index, which returns an array of categories, and type int this as an array. And finally, I'm going to add over to this display default category, saying that I want to return a string which contains a default category. Clear my terminal and run PHP stand once again. And check this out. PHP stand is telling me that on the default method of your categories controller, you should return a string, but at this moment, you are returning an array. Meaning that PHP stand is telling me that now that I know that you actually want to return a string because you have added this type int, I was able to infer that you are not returning a string, and instead, you are returning an array. So we can quickly address this issue by returning the first position of the categories property, and then clear the terminal and run PHP stand once again. We have completed level 6. I don't find issues on my code on level 6. I could quickly jump for level 7, level 8, and then use level max, which is an alias of the level 8. I expect that if I run PHP stand, I don't find any problems on my code base. And yeah, and now PHP stand will be able to protect me against so much more bugs, because eventually if I return something else which is not an array, PHP stand will protect me against that. And same goes with my default method, which is supposed to return a string. Now, so far, I think you could understand how productive you can get with PHP stand and how useful it can be once you add this CLI tool to your CI, for example. Your CI will become so much smarter because PHP stand will detect many errors in your code base, and basically you will stop spending so many time on pull requests because PHP stand will at least detect a certain number of problems. But if you really want to go to the next level regarding type safety, you need to learn about generics. Now, I can understand that generics is a scary word for many of you because you probably have heard that some languages implement this feature, such as C#, Java, and TypeScript. But generics, and in opposite to what some people may think, they can be used today in PHP. I was trying to come up with a definition, and basically I came up with my own definition about generics. And generics in PHP avoid the mixed type. The mixed type are basically the problem regarding static analysis, because sometimes your variable or your array access, for example, reach a mixed type, and static analysis don't know what to do or how can they protect you. And generics can avoid that, avoid the mixed type, and basically you just reach the next level regarding type safety. So I'm going to show you that. I'm going to add over into my code here, and I'm going to actually introduce a bug. And this map function, which again is supposed to return a list of strings, I'm going to introduce a bug that will happen occasionally. I'm going to do an if condition, and on this if condition, if the if condition is randomly, I'm going to return a null value, just like that. Now, if I go to my browser, I expect to find this bug on my browser. As you can see here, I'm returning now a list of strings in that, but sometimes I can see some null values popping up, which is a bug. And yet PHP-Stan at this moment, if I run PHP-Stan, it will not be able to catch this particular bug. Now, how can we make PHP-Stan smarter in order to detect this kind of bugs? Well, it starts by coming here to the phpstan.neon and activate this option with a name, checking missing iterable value type. And I'm going to put this option to true. Once I set this option to true, I'm going to get back to my categories controller and I'm going to run PHP-Stan again. Now, PHP-Stan will start to complain every time I use an array, because it will say the value type you have specified, which is an array, doesn't have any kind of contents inside of it. In other words, it's telling me that if you want to return an array, you need to give me the exact shape of that array, the exact shape and contents. Because at this time, if we take a look at this code, we are saying that we return an array. And indeed, we are returning an array. But if we can tell to PHP-Stan the exact content of this array, which is an array of strings, maybe PHP-Stan will be able to detect this kind of bugs. So let's do that. I'm going to come here and I'm going to add a new annotation. And I'm going to say, this index method will start to return an array. And I'm going to use generic arrays. I'm going to say this array will have an integer as key. As we can see here, those are integers. And we'll have a string as a value. And as you can see here, we actually want to return a list of strings and not nulls. And then I'm going to equally apply this change here to my protected categories property. Now, check this out. I'm going to run PHP-Stan once again. And PHP-Stan will tell me this. On the index method of your categories controller, you should return an array that contains string values. But instead, at this time, we are returning an array indeed with string values, but those may also be null. So once we tell the intent of our code to PHP-Stan, which is the exact shape of the returned array, PHP-Stan was able to detect that the returned array is not always a string, but sometimes it may contain null values. So we can remove our bug from our code, just like that, save our file, and run PHP-Stan once again. And PHP-Stan no longer detects issues. How nice is that? In addition, if I come here and I start returning an integer, for example, well, the return type won't be the same because right now we are returning an array with integers. And PHP-Stan will be able to detect that. It tells me that your index function should return an array with strings, but at this time, because of this return type, you are returning an array of integers. Now check this out. This goes way further, actually, with Laravel collections. You can even, for example, call the flip method here. And if you don't know flip, what flip does is basically puts values on keys and keys on values, swapping the collection. And if I run PHP-Stan, it will warn me about that. It will tell me that I expect an array of strings, but at this time, we're returning an array of integers that contain string keys. How nice is that? So I can just remove this, I run PHP-Stan once again, and PHP-Stan will hopefully report no more errors. So you can see how useful can be used these built-in generics that PHP-Stan can give us. In this time, we are using a built-in generic, which is an array, and those are generic arrays. Now, something that you don't know is that Laravel collections are also generic objects. Now, if you go to Laravel 8, this time. But first of all, let me explain you why collection is also a generic object, because that's important as well. Well, collections are a generic object in the sense that the return type from the given callable to the map function will shape the return type of the all method. Meaning that if I return an integer here, the return type here will be an array of integers. And Laravel are indeed generic, Laravel collections are indeed generic objects. But today, if you visit actually the collection class from Laravel 8, and repeat Laravel 8, let's see about Laravel 9, we don't see any references regarding generics. I don't see, for example, being used here generic arrays. If I go to the constructor, I don't see any reference to generic arrays as well. And also the all method doesn't seem to return any kind of generic arrays. So, well, where this magic is happening to the point that PHP-Stand is able to infer all the types, even calling a map and a flip and all. Well, this is happening thanks to Laracon. In fact, Laracon is injecting type definitions into the Laravel collection class, making PHP-Stand understand all the magic behind Laravel. And as we can see here, Laracon is basically injecting these stubs similar to the project definitely typed from Vue.js, not Vue.js, from TypeScript. And it's basically making PHP-Stand understand all the magic behind Laravel collections. And we can see here some annotations that, as Taylor said, sound complicated. We see some templates, for example. We also see these T keys, T values, which are also a little bit complicated if you never see these kind of things before. And we also see generic arrays being used here with the same stuff, T key and T value. This is probably confusing for some of you, but I'm going to show you an exact example, which you are going to understand all of this. So remember this untyped collection object that we have intentionally ignored here on PHP-Stand. I'm going to remove this file here so PHP-Stand can analyze this untyped collection. And then I'm going to copy the untyped collection and I'm going to add it to my categories controller to be used instead of Laravel collections. So just like that. And then, because this Laravel collection contains the same code as Laravel, I expect the code to work on the browser. And again, because PHP-Stand is not able to understand this untyped collection, that doesn't exactly mean that your code is not working. Just because you find errors in some untyped code doesn't mean that the code is not working. It just means that PHP-Stand is not able to understand your code yet. Now, again, we are here to see what is this generics annotations. So let's fully type this object to the point where we are going to make a collection that is fully understandable by static analysis tools. So let's start with all the things we have learned so far in this talk, and starting by adding native typings, just like that. And the callback of the map will be a callable, and this will return a new collection. And finally, the all method, which is supposed to return all the items on this collection, is going to return an array. Now, once I have done this, I expect PHP-Stand to start to complain about the shape of these arrays which are missing. So I'm going to clear my terminal and run PHP-Stand once again. Well, exactly. PHP-Stand is saying there is no value type specified on the type array. In other words, we need to tell PHP-Stand the shape of these items. And we can do that, as we have seen, using generic arrays. And that starts by adding an annotation and saying the content of keys and values of these items. Now, here's the thing. The items are received on the constructor. So we don't know exactly the type of keys and the type of values we are going to find on the given array of items. But let's imagine for a second, so we can move forward, that people are using this untyped collection passing an array of user models, just like that. Well, if people are using our untyped collection this way, I expect the key to be an integer, because when there is no keys, basically, the inferred type is an integer, and the value will be a user, just like that. And the constructor will obviously receive, sorry about that, will receive an array, a generic array with users as well. The map at this moment doesn't seem to need any kind of annotations, and the all method will return an array of users as well. Let's see what PHP-Stand tells about the code we have just introduced. Well, funny enough, PHP-Stand is no longer complaining about the untyped collection. It's complaining now about the categories controller, line 26. Basically now, PHP-Stand is telling me that the untyped collection on its constructor, the first argument needs to be an array of users. But at this time, you are passing me an array of strings, meaning that this type, untyped collection, is not actually generic. It doesn't adapt itself to the given argument. So we don't actually know the type of key and the type of value we are going to have on this collection class. It will always depend on the first argument of my constructor. So what we can do? Well, we can use generic types. So we come here and we say, the integer will be the type of key yet to be determined. And the user will be the type of value yet to be determined. Meaning that if you give me an array of strings, and then you call the all method, I'm going to return back that array of strings. In PHP-Stand, at static time will be basically replacing those placeholders by the real types given on an array of items. So if you give me an array of users, this will be the type of value, replace it at static time by PHP-Stand. And if you give me keys, which are strings, for example, PHP-Stand will replace at static time the type of keys, just like that. And because of that, PHP-Stand is able to understand much more how this Laravel collection class works. But now that we have added this, let's run PHP-Stand to see what it says about it. It reports a lot of errors right now, but basically those are about the fact that we are using this T key and T value without telling PHP-Stand that those are generic types. And again, those are just placeholders or templates to be used by PHP-Stand. So what we can do is come here to the top of my class and say that we have a template here, which is this T key generic type, which is just type of key yet to be determined. And the only thing I know at this moment is that this type of key is a subtype of array key. This array key subtype is basically something that fits as array key, basically. And then we also have this template T value, which is a value of is a type of value yet to be determined. And that it can be mixed, we don't know. So now let's run PHP-Stand once again. All right, it's able to detect so much less errors. We're able to jump from 10, I think, to just 1. And now it's complaining about this map function returning a generic class, which is the class we have just created, but you didn't specify the new T key and the new T value of the untyped collection. So let's over there to see what exactly I'm talking about. PHP-Stand, it's basically complaining about this self return type. It's telling me that you are returning a new collection, which is the new self, but you need to tell me the shape, meaning that the type of key in the type of value of that returned collection. So let's fully type as well this map to make PHP-Stand understand all of this. So we have a callable, and the callable receives T value as a first argument, and we'll receive T key as a second argument. As we can see here, the type of value is a string here. And then we also say that the new returned collection will have the same type of key of the current collection. As we can see here, the map doesn't change the type of key. The keys will remain untouched. And then the new type of value, and this is an interesting thing, the new type of value will be actually the return type from the given callable. Remember that when we went to the categories controller and we see that when you return a different type from the given callable, we get a different shape. So that means that we need to actually instruct PHP-Stand that the new returned type, which is the new collection, have the same type of key, but we'll have a different type of value. And the type of value, it's simply the return type from the callable, just like that. One small thing is that tmap value is a new template, and therefore it needs to be added on the top of this method. So now I expect PHP Stand, I'm sorry, do not detect any more issues. And of course, if I add over into my code here, which is using this untyped collection, if I return an integer or even a null value, I expect PHP Stand to start to complain about this code. And there you go. It's telling me that I'm not supposed to return an array of null values, and I'm supposed to return an array of strings. And yeah, simply as this, we have a fully typed, 100% fully static and non-analyzable collection class. PHP Stand, Psalm, your favorite static analysis tool, will be able to infer all the types using this collection class. Now, not only, and by the way, let's leave the terminal without any errors. There you go. And by the way, not only static analysis tools, just like Taylor said, even editors like PHP Storm. In this example, I have PHP Storm in this function getUsers, which returns an array. Now, this is not a generic array with annotation, and therefore, if I call the for each and then I loop over each user, I don't get any suggestions, no autocompletion at all. Now, when using generic arrays, as you can see here, so I'm telling PHP Stand, hey man, this getUsers returns an array of users with integers as keys. And now when I loop with the for each function, I do get some autocompletion on the user. How nice is that? And let's use even more complicated usages. Here, for example, I'm telling PHP Stand that I'm returning an array without any generic annotations. And PHP Stand is not able to infer the first position of the returned array. Now, if I add generic annotations telling PHP Stand exactly the contents and shape of the given returned array, even if I array access to the first position, I will get autocompletion. How nice is that? And yeah, to close my talk, because I'm probably over 30 minutes already, let's talk a little bit about type consistency. And this is an important topic that really matters. When you are trying to implement in your team this type of annotations, you need to ensure that everyone respects the same rules, because right now we are using annotations and we are also kind of repeat ourselves with native typings. And some people get confused. Should I use both? Should I use just one? Well, let me tell you that. What you can do is one of two options I'm about to give you. The first one is the first I use. So I always use native typings, and I delegate to annotations the information I cannot give with native typings. In this case, I cannot use generic arrays with typings. So basically, I just add this annotation on top of this native typing. But if I scroll all the way down into this default method, I'm returning a string. I don't have any more information to add. Therefore, I don't need an annotation. The second option, which you may use as well, is just simply remove all the native typings. So you come here and say, I return a string, and you just remove all the native typings, just like that. It's completely up to you. And PHP Stand will not complain about this. It's exactly the same code as before. The only difference is that you don't use runtime type checking. With my solution, which is the first one, which uses native typings on top of PHP Stand annotations, we leverage runtime type checking on top of the static type checking. So basically, we use both. And that's it about my talk. Please tweet me about what your thoughts about my talk. What are your thoughts about type checking? And keep enjoying Laracon. This is a great conference. Congratulations to all the organizers. And yeah, thank you so much.